She blushed, whispering, "You're my first." The cowboy vowed to be her last. Before we begin, take a moment to comment your city. Where are you watching from tonight? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now settle into a quiet place, breathe deep, and let the whispers of the Wild West carry you into tonight's tale. Tonight, Carson Creek sleeps beneath the silver moon. The wind pushes through the sign above the general store, making it creak like the weary complaint of old wood. From the saloon drifts coarse drunken laughter, a sound that only makes the night feel colder. Amid that silence, a 19-year-old girl clutches a small cloth bag inside only a few coins, 2 worn dresses, and her mother's Bible. She trembles as she leads her old horse Buttercup out of a narrow alley, her heart pounding like a battle drum. A question sharp as a knife echoes in the night. Who is she running from? And will the desert ahead redeem her or bury her forever? The back streets of Carson Creek lie still as stone. Moonlight scatters across the dust, blurring through a veil of mist. From far away comes the broken strum of a banjo, tangled with raucous laughter from the saloon. But here, only the scent of dry straw and the breath of a horse remain. Eleanor stands with one trembling hand upon the wooden latch. Her heart beats so loud, she fears it might wake the whole town. Leaning close, she slips the lock free, with only the faintest scrape of metal. Buttercup, the aging horse her father once loved, snorts softly, pressing its head against her shoulder. Eleanor lays her brow against the rough mane, whispering in a shaky breath, "Hush now, girl. Just tonight. We must go." In the bag upon her shoulder, 17 coins jingle together heavy as fate itself. Her mother's Bible rests close against them, the only thing keeping her knees from giving way. The wind seeps through broken planks, carrying the smell of wood smoke and the day's lingering desert heat. Eleanor lifts her gaze to the sky, where the moon hangs like a cold, watchful eye. 19 years old, and instead of dreaming of a warm home, she chooses the barren desert, chasing freedom. Each step, pulling Buttercup away from town, tears her heart in two, caught between the fear of being dragged back and the fragile hope that somewhere ahead another life might wait. Tonight, Eleanor is no longer the child sold off by a paper contract. She is a runaway staking her future on the back of a horse on the merciless desert, and on the fragile belief that chains are not the only destiny carved for her. Part 1. Darkness and Freedom. The open ground beyond Carson Creek shimmered beneath the silver moon. A cold wind swept across the dry sagebrush, its rustle whispering like ghostly voices. The old horse Buttercup breathed heavily, hooves sinking into the hardened earth. Each step landed in silence, echoing like a funeral drum in the night. Eleanor turned once, casting a glance back. The wooden rooftops of the town lay swallowed in shadow, lit only by a few trembling oil lamps. Laughter spilled from the saloon, tugging at her ears like a rope, trying to drag her backward. But she tightened her grip on the reins, urging the horse to quicken its pace. A sudden gust slashed across her face, carrying the dusty tang of crushed sage. Eleanor shivered, pulling her mother's old wool scarf close around her throat. That shiver was not just from the wind. It was the chill of loneliness seeping into her very bones. Her chest ached, her heart pounded wild, yet her lungs filled with something strange freedom. Freedom tasted of dust and fear bitter as gall. but also sweet like a cool sip of water in a desert of thirst. She bent low, whispering her voice, trembling, yet fierce, never going back, never again. Buttercup snorted in reply, as though the horse too understood the despair and longing in its young rider's heart. Above them, the moon hung in silence, pulling their two shadows long and endless across the sand. The road ahead held only darkness, the hiss of the wind, and the steady beat of hooves. Yet for Eleanor, each hoofbeat was a chain falling away from her life. In the eerie solitude of that first night, a small flame stirred within the chest of the 19-year-old girl, the flame of freedom fragile, yet burning brighter than any lantern, still flickering in the town behind her. Part 2. The Burning Desert. The sun stood at its highest, hanging above like a giant furnace. Its light poured down until the sky itself seemed to tremble, the horizon blurred as though a ribbon of fire was burning across the earth. No cloud, no cooling wind, only waves of heat pressing tight against the skin, making every breath a heavy burden. Buttercup staggered with each step. The horse's mane was soaked in sweat, clumped and sharp with its sour scent. Eleanor patted the damp neck, her hand trembling with thirst and exhaustion. Her lips cracked, stinging the taste of salt and blood on her tongue. The canteen at her side held only a few drops sloshing faintly like a sad little tide. She lifted her gaze. All around her stretched nothing but red earth and stone. No tree, no stream, no sign of life. Even the birds had gone silent. Despair tapped its slow rhythm inside her chest. Her throat scraped raw as she swallowed as if sandpaper clawed at her. She thought of the old well back in Carson Creek, where she had once bent low, drawing up a bucket of cold, clear water, letting it spill cool down her arms. Now the memory itself felt like a cruel trick. Suddenly, Buttercup's legs buckled the horse, dropping for a moment to its knees. Eleanor gasped, tugging at the reins, whispering through her trembling breath, "No, Buttercup. Please hold on. Don't leave me now." She tilted the last drops of water into the horse's mouth. The animal quivered, but in its tired, clouded eyes, a faint spark returned. With effort, it rose again, each step shaky, as though it might collapse once more. Eleanor exhaled in relief, though her tears burned her lips even more. Noon slid into afternoon, and at last, the wind rose. But it carried no comfort, only heat and dust. Small whirlwinds lashed her face, leaving grit bitter on her tongue, biting against her cracked lips. She drew the scarf across her mouth, but still the sand crept in, scraping raw. And in her mind came the echo of her stepfather's voice. "A girl is nothing but property. Whoever pays the price will have her." The words tangled with every step, driving her farther harder, until that voice might finally vanish into the desert. But the echo would not die, and the sound of her horse's labored breathing reminded her that death itself could be waiting just beneath this merciless sun. Her vision swam. Through the wavering heat, she saw green ahead, trees shade water glimmering bright. Her heart leapt. She pulled the reins, urging Buttercup forward. But as they neared the trees, dissolved into stone and sand. A mirage. A cruel trick of the desert. She stopped, gasping for air that would not come. Her chest burned. She sank to the ground, clutching her head. The smell of scorched earth rose harsh around her, stinging her eyes. For a moment, she wanted to surrender. To lie down, let the sand cover her, and end the running, the memories, the poisonous eyes of Big Jim. She opened her cloth bag, pulled out the worn leather Bible, and pressed it tight against her chest. Her hoarse voice broke into fragments of prayer. Lord, please don't forsake me. Please give Buttercup strength. Her hands cracked and bleeding from scratches trembled as she held on. And yet, that trembling hold gave her enough to stand again. Buttercup nudged against her shoulder, snorting a rough, broken sound. Eleanor bit her lip, tasting salt and iron. We can't fall here. Not yet. She rose, tugged the reins, and stepped onward into the burning sand. By late afternoon, the sun sank low, painting the sky with a red fierce as blood. Eleanor stumbled, but then spotted a scatter of mesquite bushes ahead. A spark of hope lit her chest. Beneath their shade, the soil was darker. She dropped to her knees, clawing into the dirt, desperate for even a trace of dampness. But the earth crumbled dry, only dust. Her heart plummeted. Buttercup groaned low, a sound of weary sorrow. Eleanor wrapped her arms around the horse's neck, pressing her cheek against the sweat-soaked mane. If we can't find water, at least you won't let me die alone. Her whisper melted into the sunset, heavy yet tender. Darkness fell swiftly. A single star blinked against the indigo sky. Eleanor lifted her head, tears streaking her burning face. Deep within, a tiny flame of hope flickered weak, yet not extinguished. Tomorrow, there must be water. There has to be. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart still racing, still alive. As long as it beat, she would not surrender. Buttercup trudged on, weary but unbroken. Their two silhouettes stretched long beneath the first star, defying the vast, merciless desert. And in that desert night, Eleanor understood. Freedom was not a door swung wide, but a trembling step taken through despair. Thirst, burning lips cracked, she whispered within her soul, I am alive. I belong to no one, and I will never go back. Part 3. The Figure on the Ridge. Dawn crept gently across the desert, laying down a pale wash of gold. The sun had not yet turned fierce, but its light was already pushing back, the night revealing every gray ripple of sand and every bare stone. Eleanor slumped against the saddle eyes, heavy hands clutching the reins as if that last habit alone kept her alive. Buttercup dragged onward, step by weary step, her flanks streaked with dried sweat. Eleanor's lips split and bled, her mind swaying, the taste of iron clinging to her own breath. And then, upon the ridge of rock ahead, a rider appeared. He stood tall and still, like a dark statue carved against the morning sky. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed half his face, a long coat lifted softly in the early wind. With the sunrise blazing behind him, his figure looked almost otherworldly, as if the desert itself had shaped him from stone and light. Eleanor startled her heart, hammering not from thirst this time, but from raw instinct. Her trembling hand pulled her father's old Colt from the cloth bag, lifting it to her chest. The gun felt heavy, the barrel wavering in her dry grip. She had never once pulled a trigger. Yet now it was the only wall between her and this stranger. Slowly, the rider urged his horse down the rocky slope. Each hoofbeat struck the earth in steady rhythm, slow and certain, like the knock of fate at a door. When he reached 20 paces away, he stopped. His horse's breath curled white in the chill of morning mist. The breeze carried toward her the scent of leather-stale sweat and the faintest trace of tobacco. He raised his head. Gray-blue eyes found hers, scanning the hollows of her face, the cracked lips, then resting on Buttercup, trembling her flanks flecked with foam. His voice rumbled low and rough, like stones rolling in a riverbed. "Looks like you need water." Eleanor clenched her teeth, her lips burning as she forced out a brittle whisper. "I'll manage." The corner of his mouth tugged upward, part surprise, part something near amusement. He tilted his head, unhurried, not moving closer, only letting his gaze linger patient and unreadable. The air between them stretched taut. Inside, Eleanor's wariness tangled with a spark of curiosity. She could not tell, was this man a savior or another cage waiting to close? Part 4. The drop of water that saved her. After that tense meeting at dawn, Jake did not press forward. He only gave a slight nod, turning his horse slowly toward the northwest. Eleanor watched him go, her hand still tight around her father's old colt, her heart torn. To trust or not, to follow or stay behind, the desert had drained nearly all of her strength. Buttercup swayed, ready to collapse, her eyes dull with thirst. Eleanor bit her lip, tasting blood again. At last, she tapped her boots, urging the horse to follow. An hour dragged by. The sun climbed higher, pressing down with heat that felt like it would crush her into the sand. And then, across a stretch of gray stone, there was a glimmer of green. A stand of mesquite whispered in the wind. Beneath their shade, a shallow pool shone clear, its surface trembling with light. Eleanor's heart seized. Water. Buttercup needed no urging. She rushed ahead, plunging her muzzle into the pool, drinking with desperate gulps. Water splashed, the earthy scent rising sharp. But to Eleanor, that sound was lovelier than any hymn. She dropped to her knees at the edge, scooping trembling handfuls to her face. The shock of cool against her burning skin made her shake, almost cry. Sweat and tears mixed with the stream, tracing down her sun-darkened cheeks. Jake led his horse beside her. He rinsed his canteen, filled it fresh, and held it out. He did not force her, only offered his gray-blue eyes, calm and steady. "Drink. Slowly. The desert doesn't care who we are. It only swallows the thirsty." His voice was low, rough, each word falling like stone into sand. Eleanor's hands trembled as she took it, sipping in small swallows. Each drop sliding down her raw throat felt like a candle being lit inside her chest. Her lips quivered. She whispered, "Thank you, sir." Jake tilted his head, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Not time to call me sir yet, girl." When Buttercup had drunk her fill and lay resting in the shade, Jake gathered dry mesquite branches, coaxing a fire to life. Smoke curled upward, sweet with the scent of wood. From his saddlebag, he pulled a small pouch of coarse coffee, poured it into a tin pot, and set it to boil. The bubbling sound rose soft, the aroma spreading thick and sharp. Eleanor sat a short distance away, the colt still across her lap, but no longer clenched tight. Jake poured the coffee into a tin cup and held it toward her. The rising steam stung her dry eyes, drawing sudden tears. She reached out, inhaling deeply. The bittersweet scent carried her back to a morning long ago, her mother humming softly by the stove. She sipped, bitter at first, then settling into a hidden sweetness. It felt like a thread pulling her back to life. They sat in silence, broken only by wind in the mesquite and the snap of firewood. Jake leaned against a stone, eyes half closed, but she knew he was not asleep. His silence was not indifference. It was steady, like a wall she might rest against. At last, Eleanor spoke, lips cracked, but brave. "Why? Why help me? Strangers in the desert don't often do that." Jake's gaze stayed on the flames. Maybe I saw something of myself in your eyes. Or maybe I just don't care to watch someone die of thirst when I've water to spare. The words were plain, but they sank deep, rippling like a stone dropped into a well. Eleanor held the cup, staring into the fire-lit water. Since she had fled, she had never allowed her guard to fall. Every night she had stayed awake, listening, waiting. But now, with the smell of coffee smoke, the steady breath of her horse nearby, her eyelids grew heavy. She glanced at Jake. His face was lined by sun and wind, a few dark strands fallen from beneath his hat. He asked no questions, pressed no answers. He simply sat there, letting her keep her silence. For the first time, Eleanor set the colt down beside her bag instead of clinging to it. A small act, but for her, it was rare surrender. Night crept in. The first stars pricked through the deep violet sky. Eleanor stretched her hands toward the flames, the firelight catching in her dark eyes, making them glisten like tired seas. Jake lifted his gaze briefly from the fire, giving her the faintest nod, as if to say, "You made it through today. Tomorrow will be harder, but you are still here." Eleanor hugged the old Bible to her chest, fingers tracing its worn pages. For the first time in many days, her whisper was not born of panic, but of gratitude. "Thank you." She did not know if the words were for God, for her mother, or for the silent cowboy. Perhaps for all three. Beneath the mesquite, beside that hidden pool, Eleanor had been saved not only by water, but by the quiet presence of another soul. The desert had not grown softer yet. For the first time she felt her heart ease, as though she had found a fragile shelter amid the storm of sand. Part 5. By the firelight. The desert night unfolded dark and heavy as a vast blanket spread across the land. In that great blackness, a single flame flickered, glowing red and gold, fighting to keep two weary souls warm. The crackle of burning wood blended with the distant cry of coyotes, weaving together a mournful hymn of the West. Eleanor sat close to the fire, her hands stretched forward, letting the warmth seep into her cracked fingers. Smoke clung to her dress, the sweet scent of mesquite wood lingering in her hair. Across from her, Jake leaned against a stone-tall frame, shadowed hat pulled low. He stayed silent, gray-blue eyes fixed on the fire, as though the flames themselves held the weight of his past. The quiet stretched, broken only by Buttercup's tired breath. Eleanor held her Bible close to her chest, hesitating. Then, as if silence itself might burst her heart, she spoke, her voice quivering. "When I was little, my mother used to sing me a hymn every night. 'Nearer, my God, to thee.' She said if I sang it enough, I would never lose my way." Her voice faltered, catching on a sob, but she forced a smile. "I don't remember all the words, just that part. Even though it be a cross that raiseth me." The last note drifted into the night, fragile as thread in the wind. Jake tilted his head, his eyes no longer distant. He gave a slow nod, his voice low and rough. "Your mother was wise. Music holds us when everything else lets go." In that moment, Eleanor felt as though a door had opened, letting her mother's memory step softly into the heavy air. The fire stretched Jake's shadow long across the sand. His weathered hands clenched around his knee. At last, he spoke his words, rolling out, heavy as stones. "I once worked cattle down in Texas. Thought I'd spend my life riding the herds. Then the war came. Blue coats, gray coats made no difference. In the end, it was only bodies in the mud." He paused, eyes sinking toward the ground, as if blood still lay beneath the sand. There was a boy I dragged from the trench. He didn't make it. But before he went, he whispered for his mama. All I could tell him was, "She's waiting for you." His voice broke, then fell silent. The fire flared, showing the scars carved deep across his face, hiding grief even deeper. Eleanor's heart ached. Part of her longed to reach across the fire and take his weathered hand. But fear held her still. Instead, she whispered, "You didn't leave him alone." That's more than most would have done. Jake lifted his gaze, his eyes locking with hers. He didn't answer aloud, but in that look was a quiet gratitude. The wind shifted. The flames wavered. Eleanor pulled her mother's old scarf tighter, yet inside she felt warmer than she had in many days. She realized since she had fled, this was the first time someone had sat with her listening without judgment. Jake stirred the coals with a branch, speaking rough and low. "A young woman like you ought to be sitting beneath a roof, not trembling under desert stars." Eleanor gave a faint laugh, bitter and sweet at once. Maybe, but that roof was a cage. Their eyes met. In that brief silence, they recognized the same pain, one who had lost his home to war, the other her youth to a bargain made like a piece of property. No promises. No touch. Only a look. And it was enough to tell them they were no longer entirely alone. Coyotes cried long across the night, as though mourning the sorrows of humankind. Eleanor closed her eyes, listening to the wind sweep the stone, smelling the faint trace of cooling coffee in the pot. Beside her, Jake remained silent, but she felt his presence strong as firelight. She leaned closer to the flames, whispering softly, almost to herself, "Maybe tonight is the first night I tremble not from fear, but from someone sitting near." Jake gave no reply. Only the sound of wind, the horse's weary snort, and the crack of glowing embers. Yet his silence was not empty. It was steady, firm enough that Eleanor for the first time dared to breathe deep and let the weight upon her chest fall into the sand. In the glow of the fire, with coyotes mourning far away, and desert darkness all around, Eleanor and Jake needed no more words. One recalled the hymn his mother sang, the other the memory of war. Two wounds so different yet mirrored, recognized, shared. And in that moment, in the harsh West, two souls found the first spark of warmth in each other. Part 6. The Secret. Revealed. Morning sun lay soft, yet the earth already blazed gold beneath it. Jake reined in his horse, his sharp eyes sweeping across the sandy trail. He bent low, picked up a small stone and tossed it aside. "Fresh tracks," he said, voice low and rough, pointing at the ground. "Less than a day old." Eleanor followed his gaze. Hoof prints pressed deep, sharp, and clear. The night wind had not yet erased them. Her heartbeat quickened, breath catching tight. Jake's brow arched. Not wanderers. They're riding in a group. Someone's on a hunt. Eleanor gripped the reins, her hand gone cold. They moved on, and soon a thin column of smoke curled upward on the horizon, bending against the pale sky. A faint scent of burnt wood drifted on the breeze. Jake's slowed eyes narrowing. "Camp," he muttered. "Closer than I thought." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. In her mind rose the image of Big Jim, his crooked smile spreading wide, blotting out the sky. Jake turned his gaze hard as steel. "That's no accident. They're looking for someone." They stopped beneath a sparse mesquite. Jake dismounted, tied his horse to a branch, then stood, tall arms folded across his chest. "Time's up, Mary Smith." His voice fell heavy as stones. "I don't ride beside a stranger, only to have a pack of hunters dogging our trail." "Who are you?" Eleanor clutched her cloth bag tight to her chest. The false name she had chosen, Mary Smith, shattered in the air. I just wanted to get far away. That's all." Jake's eyes never wavered. "Far enough to risk death in the desert. And who's powerful enough, cruel enough to send armed men riding after you?" His silence cut deeper than a blade, stripping her of every last shield. Tears came sudden, spilling hot. She turned her face aside, staring down at the sand, her voice hoarse and breaking. My real name is Eleanor May Hutchkins. My stepfather sold me to Big Jim Calhoun. He wants to marry me. The papers are signed. If he takes me back, I won't be human anymore." Her words snapped raw and jagged like a rope frayed and finally torn through. Jake stood still. Only the wind moved swirling red dust around them. Then he stepped closer, slow and measured. Each footfall made Eleanor shrink back, bracing for anger, for judgment. But instead, his voice came low, solid as stone Calhoun. A bitter smile tugged his mouth. "That name's as foul as a rattler's hiss. Rich in gold, poor in soul. Figures." Eleanor lifted her tear-streaked face, fear wide in her eyes. You know him. Anyone who's lived long in these parts has heard his name. And they all know this. What he wants, he takes." He paused, breathing slow, steady. Then his words fell hard like iron on rock. "But not while I'm still breathing." The weight inside Eleanor broke loose. For days, her secret had been shackles on her heart. Now, it was out laid bare. Fear still gripped her, yet relief surged through, flooding her chest. She bowed her head, tears falling onto her cracked hands. If you'd rather leave me, I'd understand. I don't want to drag anyone down." Jake bent his rough palm, settling gently on her shoulder. The touch was firm, not binding, lifting, not trapping. "Listen," he said, voice deep but sure. "I won't leave you to the wolves. A man like Calhoun has no right to call another soul his own." Eleanor's eyes widened, caught in his. And in those gray-blue depths, she saw not the gaze of a stranger, but of one who had known enough loss to recognize her pain. The sun tipped westward, their shadows stretching long across the sand. Eleanor clutched her mother's Bible-tight heart, trembling between fear and a strange peace. Jake turned, checked his revolver, and nodded toward the horizon. "We ride. If Calhoun's hunting, he won't stop. But you won't be running alone." A gust rose, swirling red dust thick in the air, yet within it lingered the faint scent of last night's campfire, strangely steady, oddly safe. For the first time, Eleanor felt she was no longer just a fugitive. She was someone standing with another at her side. The hoof prints on the sand, the smoke on the horizon, they had stripped her secret bare. But in the moment of trembling truth, she had heard the vow of a cowboy, "Not while I'm still breathing." Fear still clung close, but in her chest, a new spark glowed lightness and the fragile hope that this time she would not face the dark alone. Part 7. The Vow Not to Abandon. That night the desert held its breath. A full moon hung high, silver light spilling over the ridges, turning the hills into blades of steel. 2 horses stood still, their shadows stretching across the sand, blending with the pale glow. Eleanor sat by a stone, her arms wrapped tight around her knees. The night wind slipped through the rocks, carrying the dusty scent of stone and the faint bite of dry weeds. Behind her, Buttercup lowered her head to graze on the sparse tufts, each rough chew echoing clear in the silence. Jake stood a few paces away, quietly checking his Winchester. His movements were slow, unhurried, yet each one carried the sharp edge of vigilance. Under the moonlight, the lines of hardship carved deep across his face. His gray-blue eyes caught the silver glow cold as steel, deep as midnight water. Eleanor watched him, her lips dry, trembling to form words that caught in her throat. Since confessing her true name and the truth of Big Jim, her heart had felt lighter, yet fear grew heavier. The fear that Jake might leave her to avoid the storm she carried. "You don't have to be tangled up in this," she whispered, voice shaking. "I'm only a burden." Jake did not turn. He slid the rifle back into its scabbard, silent long enough that Eleanor dropped her gaze, believing his answer had already come. Then footsteps pressed softly against the sand. Jake came closer, stopping at her side. His shadow fell across her shoulders. A broad, calloused hand rested gently upon her trembling frame. "Listen to me." His voice was low and gravelly, yet it carried with the steady force of a drumbeat rolling through canyon walls. A man like Calhoun can buy laws, can buy men, but he can't buy truth. And the truth is, he paused, each word carved clear. "You are not property." Eleanor lifted her head. Moonlight spilled across her tear-wet eyes, making them shine. Jake's gaze held hers unflinching. "As long as I draw breath, he won't lay a hand on you." Eleanor gasped softly, her chest loosening after days of suffocating fear. His words were no sweet promise, no grand oath. They were plain solid, like a stake driven firm into shifting sand. She nodded faintly, tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't know how to thank you." Jake shook his head, a fleeting smile tugging and fading. "Don't thank me. We're just surviving, and survival takes standing together." In the stillness, a fragile flame stirred within Eleanor's heart, not blazing, but steady like a lamp in a drafty cabin holding on. The night wind whistled through the rocks, moaning like a dry flute. Jake lowered himself beside her, not too close, but near enough that she felt the warmth of his body through the heavy coat. They said nothing, only breathed in rhythm, their breaths mingling with the wind. Moonlight washed across their shoulders, binding their shadows side by side upon the sand. Eleanor pressed her cheek against her knees, whispering almost to herself, "I thought I'd always be alone. But it seems not everyone turns away." Jake gave no reply, yet his hand stayed upon her shoulder, firm, silent, sure. And in that silence, hope found a root, fragile but real. Under the cold silver light spread over the stony hills, the vow of a cowboy lingered in the night. "As long as I draw breath, he won't lay a hand on you." Not a flowery pledge, but in its simple strength, it lit a spark within Eleanor. Small, fragile, but enduring like a mesquite tree rooting deep in barren stone. Part 8. You're My First. Night draped across the desert, vast and endless, as though it could swallow the whole world. Above, thousands of stars glimmered like tiny shards of glass. Then suddenly one streaked across the sky, leaving behind a trail of light that melted into darkness. The campfire flickered, glowing orange-red, pushing back the chill. Wood cracked and sparked, each ember carried off by the breeze, vanishing as if it had never been. The sweet smoke of mesquite lingered in the air, mingling with the smell of horsehide and dried sweat. Eleanor sat with her knees drawn close, arms wrapped around them, eyes lifted to the heavens. firelight painted her cheeks pink, but the warmth rising inside her came not from the flames, but from the quiet presence of the man across from her. Jake leaned against a stone hat pulled low, turning a small knife slowly in his hand. His gray-blue eyes caught the fire's reflection, steady and deep as midnight water. He spoke little as always, glancing now and then, only to make sure she was all right. The silence between them no longer pressed. It wrapped around like a heavy blanket, drawing their breaths and heartbeats into one rhythm. Eleanor bit her lip, her heart racing. Inside her burned an urge she could no longer hold back, an urge that made her blush, yet promised release if spoken aloud. She lifted her gaze. Jake was calmly carving a sliver of wood, his manner so steady it made her pulse race all the more. Jake. She breathed soft as a sigh. He stilled the blade, lifted his eyes, piercing through every wall she tried to raise. Yeah. Her fingers tightened together. Her voice trembled, words spilling out like a fragile secret. You're my first kindness. Her cheeks flamed. The fire seemed to flare brighter, throwing red light against her skin. The words fell into the night, delicate as a petal in a sandstorm. Eleanor shut her eyes, heart pounding, braced for silence, for mockery, for distance. The fire popped. Coyotes wailed far away. Long moments stretched thin. She thought she had erred, that she should have kept her heart sealed. Then Jake's voice came rough and certain, each word carved deep. And you'll be my last. Eleanor's eyes flew open. His gaze was fixed on her, not mocking, not pitying, but so serious her breath caught. He set the knife aside, leaned forward, his voice slow and steady. I've wandered too long, lost too much. But if the Lord put you in my path, then I'm not letting you go. Tears broke loose, hot against her chilled cheeks. She covered her face, but Jake reached across, gently drawing her hands away. His palm was rough as stone, yet the touch was tender as cloth. He didn't force her to look, only let his hand anchor hers. Jake, her voice broke. Shh. His head shook faintly, his eyes stern yet soft. Cry if you need. Just remember you're not alone anymore. Eleanor bowed, letting the tears fall without shame. Each drop seemed to wash away a piece of fear, leaving space for hope to slip in. Another star shot across the heavens, brighter than the last. Eleanor lifted her head, breathing deep, eyes still wet. Jake remained at her side, silent, yet his presence spoke louder than words. Her heart beat fast, not from fear this time, but from something new, something stronger, trust. Firelight glowed. A star fell. Their eyes met across the flame. And in that fragile instant, a seed of love rooted small yet strong enough to grow even in the harsh soil of the desert. Under falling stars, with fire crackling low, a young woman whispered trembling, "You're my first kindness." And a cowboy answered firm as stone, "And you'll be my last." No grand speeches, no flowery vows, just two plain sentences yet together. They planted a love that would endure, quiet and steadfast, a shelter for them both in the wild, unyielding West. Part 9. Blood-red sunset. Sunset poured across the desert, painting the sky in deep crimson, like blood spilled over cloth. Dust swirled high from pounding hooves, gathering into a storm cloud haze, warning of the violence to come. Eleanor pressed herself tight against the trunk of a mesquite tree, clutching her small cloth bag, her heart racing wild. Buttercup screamed hooves, striking nervously, sensing the danger rushing near. Jake stood tall before her hand, resting steady on his holster. The newborn crescent moon curved pale across the blood-red sky, casting his face in light cold as steel. From the rolling dust, 4 riders broke through. Hooves thundered gunmetal, glinted in the dying sun. At their head rode a giant of a man, Big Jim Calhoun. His beard hung thick, his muddy eyes dull and cruel, his massive frame looming like a grizzly in the dusk. He yanked his reins, horse rearing high, dust flying, and roared, "Where's the girl? Papers say she's mine." His voice cracked like thunder, freezing Eleanor's blood. Jake stepped forward, his voice deep and unyielding. Paper doesn't make it right. The world seemed to hold its breath. Every sound, the wind, the horses, the creak of leather fell silent. Only Eleanor's pounding heartbeat filled her ears. One of Calhoun's men spat, sneering, "Think you can stand alone?" Thornton Jake never moved, eyes blazing cold. "Try me." And in an instant, everything shattered. A shout, hands to holsters. The deafening crack of gunfire tore the silence apart. Jake's Colt flared bright. One man toppled from his saddle, thudding to the sand. Gunfire flashed, smoke stung sharp, the acrid scent of powder burning in the air. Eleanor clung to the tree bark, splintering above her head as bullets chewed through wood. She cried out, tears streaking her dust-caked face. Big Jim charged forward. Shotgun raised his bellow, shaking the desert. "She's mine, papers and law both say so." Jake spun, eyes hard as winter ice. His words rang like iron striking stone. "Law ain't justice, and you've never known love." Big Jim fired. The blast ripped the mesquite apart, shards flying, sap burning in the air. Eleanor stumbled, thrown to the dirt, the world quaking around her. Jake lunged, rolling through the dust, Colts blazing. Another outlaw crumpled. A third fired back, muzzle flash flaring near Eleanor's ear, leaving her reeling. Jake kept firing, but Calhoun was a wall of fury, charging like a raging bear. A bullet ripped his shoulder, spraying blood, but he only roared louder, hurling aside his shotgun and leaping down from the saddle. They hit the ground, hard dust exploding around them. Calhoun's fists hammered like sledgehammers, earth shaking with each blow. Jake fought back, but the giant's sheer bulk bore down, choking the breath from him. Eleanor's scream caught in her throat. Her hands fumbled in the bag, closing on her father's old Colt. The gun felt impossibly heavy, dragging her arms low. She raised it, both hands, trembling sight, fixed on the beast crushing Jake. Calhoun's hands closed around Jake's throat, his growl like an animal's. Jake's eyes burned red, yet still held no despair, only trust. Trust in her. "Let him go," Eleanor cried, voice breaking. Calhoun turned his head, blood streaking his face, and grinned a twisted grin. "You ain't got it in you, girl." Tears streamed hot down Eleanor's cracked lips. The barrel shook in her hands. But when she looked into Jake's eyes, into the man who had sworn to protect her with his every breath she knew, this was her moment. Her finger tightened. The gun roared. Fire flashed. Smoke curled. Calhoun jerked, eyes wide, his grin twisting into shock. His grip loosened. He stumbled, then crashed heavy into the sand, the earth trembling beneath his fall. The desert fell still. Only Jake's ragged breathing, Eleanor's racing heart, and the settling dust remained. The Colt slipped from her hands, clattering to the dirt. Her fingers shook violently, tears streaming unchecked. Jake rolled aside, coughing hard, then pushed himself upright. Sweat and blood streaked his face, but his eyes glimmered clear and steady. You did what had to be done. The sunset blazed, red dust clouds hung thick, gunpowder stung the air. Amid the chaos, a girl had pulled the trigger for the first time. A cowboy had thrown himself into danger's teeth. And when Big Jim fell, it was more than the end of a fight. It was a turning. Eleanor was no longer only a fugitive. She had saved her own life. Part 10. The First Gunshot. The Colt still trembled in Eleanor's hands, the sting of gunpowder sharp in her nose. Dust swirled thick, spinning in the blood-red glow of sunset. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Her heartbeat thundered louder than the wind rushing through the sage. Each breath pounded in her ears, heavy as funeral drums. Before her, the massive form of Big Jim toppled at last, crashing to the earth with a thud that shook the ground. The storm had ended. The pistol slipped from her fingers, falling into the sand heavy, as if it had pulled her very soul with it. Eleanor dropped to her knees, tears streaming freely. Her hands shook violently, numb from the recoil that had just changed her life. Jake lay on his side chest, heaving hard. He coughed, each breath tearing like knives in his throat. Dust clung to his clothes. Blood soaked his shoulder red. Eleanor scrambled to him, falling to her knees. Jake, are you hurt? His eyes opened dim with exhaustion, but shining still. A faint smile curved his lips, weak but unshaken. You, he rasped, voice broken. You saved us. Tears sparkled in the fading light. Eleanor shook her head, clutching his bloodied arm. I just couldn't bear to lose you. The words tumbled out raw, trembling truer than anything she had ever spoken. Jake closed his eyes for a beat, letting them sink into his heart. Then his rough, bloodied hand rose to touch her cheek. The calluses were coarse, the touch gentle, carrying the warmth of a man who had fought all his life, yet still held kindness. Eleanor. He said her true name for the first time, his voice hoarse but firm. You are stronger than you know. She pressed her hand against his. The scent of blood mingling with smoke and dust, sealing this moment forever. Around them, the desert fell eerily still. The bodies of men and horses lay scattered, already claimed by the wind's thin veil of dust. Buttercup gave a soft, broken whinny, as if to remind them life still remained. Eleanor lifted her gaze skyward. The sun slipped away, the first star trembling above. The fear that once bound her now shifted into something else, the trembling of a girl who had crossed into her own strength. She was no longer only a fugitive. She had stood, faced the terror, and saved them both. Together, she and Jake dug shallow graves in the barren ground, covering Big Jim and his men beneath rough stones. No markers, no names, only silence and desert wind to bury them. Eleanor stared at the mound of earth, whispering, "This is the end. No one owns me anymore." Jake set a hand on her shoulder. He said nothing, but his eyes deep steady, as stone spoke for him. From now on, you're not alone. At dawn, the sun rose, casting warm gold across the horizon. Eleanor rode Buttercup Jake at her side. Their shadows stretched long across the bright sand. She turned to him, hair wild in the morning wind, her eyes soft yet full of resolve. Now, where do we go? Jake's lips curved in a rare smile. Toward the sea, where the air tastes of salt, not dust. Anywhere you choose to call home. She smiled back, resting her head on his shoulder for a fleeting moment. The heart that once quaked with fear now beat steady, And sure, the dust had settled. Big Jim had fallen. And in the hush that followed, a 19-year-old girl fired her first shot, not only killing the man who sought to chain her, but killing the fear that once ruled her life. Jake's voice, ragged but proud, whispered, "You saved us." Eleanor's tears glimmered. "I just couldn't bear to lose you." In the harsh West, that was the gunshot that began a new life. No more chains, only two souls riding side by side toward freedom. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky soft gold. Shadows shrank back. Peace stretched wide across the desert. Beneath that quiet sky, two riders moved slow and steady, their figures etched long upon the sand. Behind them lay the rough mound of Big Jim's grave, nameless, silent, already fading into dust. Eleanor leaned her head against Jake's shoulder. The morning breeze swept cool and sweet, tangling her hair. And her heart, once bound in fear, now beat calm and free. A voice low and steady seemed to rise with the dawn. In the hard West, kindness and love are the only true shelter. Freedom begins when you trust someone enough to walk beside them. The wind carried the scent of hope. The road ahead was long uncertain, yet with every hoofbeat they rode into the morning as though into a new beginning. And now, dear listener, where are you tuning in from tonight? Leave a comment with your city. Rate this tale from 0 to 10, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next Wild West love story.